Hey YouTube, Kira Twig here, bringing you all my legendary Exodia Yu-Gi-Oh deck profile. I've been getting a lot of requests for people wanting to see an Exodia deck that focuses on all the different variants of Exodia, including the newest one being the legendary Exodia Incarnate, Exodia Necros, and also Exodius, the Ultimate Forbidden Lord. It's a really awesome deck that I tried to make to incorporate all of these different Exodia cards, being more of a draw deck to draw into the main 5 Exodia pieces, while also implementing these different Exodia forms just for more graveyard plays. In the case that your Exodia pieces do get sent to the graveyard, you have plenty of ways to recycle those cards back into your hand to reuse, and also benefit from having these cards in the graveyard for some more stronger plays with cards like the legendary Exodia Incarnate. So let's go ahead and get started with the deck profile. So for the monsters in the deck, we're running 3, the legendary Exodia Incarnate. With this card, it cannot be normal summoned or set. It must be special summoned from your hand by attributing 1 Forbidden 1 monster, and cannot be special summoned by other ways. This card gains 1000 attack for each Forbidden 1 monster in your graveyard, and it's unaffected by other card effects. Once per turn, during your end phase, you can add 1 Forbidden 1 monster from your graveyard to your hand, and when this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can reveal any number of Forbidden 1 monsters from your hand. If you do, draw 1 for each card. So the more you build up from the graveyard using this card, the better it'll be when this card gets destroyed, because the more you have in your hand, the weaker this card also gets, but then giving you draw power to draw into more important cards. And all you need to do is basically summon out a Forbidden 1 monster onto the field, and then tribute it for this card, and then you basically have a pretty indestructible card on the field to make use of. I run 3 of it just because you can have this easy setup with this card on the field, and you want to make use of it that much earlier in the game, because then you can get those cards back into your hand if the other Exodia pieces were basically sent to the graveyard. And then for the one-ofs in the deck, we have to run 1 of each piece of Exodia. Basically all 5 pieces of Exodia here for the deck. Pretty much standard, since this card's been at 1 for the longest that anyone can remember. But running 1 of each piece guarantees you all the consistency for your legendary Exodia Incarnate. All you need to do is summon out 1 of these pieces to tribute it, and then you have the 1000 attack Exodia Incarnate on the field, and you can set up more and more of these cards in the graveyard with some of the other cards we're running in the deck. But the ideal play still for the winning condition in the deck is to open up all 5 pieces of Exodia in your hand, and just having the game winning condition when you have them all to summon out Exodia. For some of the other forms of Exodia, I also run 1 Exodia Necros and 1 Exodius, the Ultimate Forbidden Lord. With Exodius, it's basically another recycle card for the Exodia monsters in your graveyard, and you summon out Exodia Necros by having the Exodia pieces in your graveyard, and then activating your contract with Exodia, which we'll go over when we get to the spell cards. But Exodius also, with having all the different 5 Forbidden 1 pieces in your graveyard and sent there by this card's effect, you can ideally win the duel with this card alone. But Exodia Necros also being sort of a powerhouse card, increasing the attack of this card by 500 points for each card in the graveyard, also be unaffected by battle and the effects of spell traps, and also, just like I said, it's an indestructible card when you have those Exodia pieces in the graveyard. 2 fun cards to definitely summon out onto the field to make use of, and all of them revolving around having the different Forbidden 1 Exodia pieces in the graveyard also. For the last of the monsters that I run in the main deck, I'm just running 3 Swift Scarecrow. This could be Battle Fader or any other, hand trap in a sense to basically stop your opponent's attacks from going through. That was the biggest weakness I found when playtesting the deck, that you have all this draw power, but you need sort of a more defensive card against your opponent, just because a couple turns can really make the play you want to go for. So 3 Swift Scarecrow definitely come in handy just for basically stalling out against my opponent and ending the battle phase from their attacks. Cards like Call by the Grave can definitely be a big weakness for this card, but they're also big weakness for all the Exodia pieces, because just banishing 1 of the Exodia pieces can be enough to completely shut down this deck, but it's the risk you take when using a deck like this. That's it for all the monsters. The main focus now for the deck will be all of the different draw power we run, but first, for Exodia Necros, you need contract with Exodia. If you have all 5 of the Exodia, the Forbidden 1, right arm, right leg, and left leg in your graveyard, you special summon 1 Exodia Necros from your hand. I only run 1 of each. It's I would say you have to rely on having both of the these cards in your hand to successfully summon out Exodia Necros. Doesn't happen as often as some of the other cards in the deck like Exodius or Exodia the Legendary Incarnate. I would say not, but just having one of each and with all this draw power means you can by chance open up both these cards in your hand and go for that play if it doesn't look like you're getting the Exodia pieces into your hand that much quickly enough as some of your other cards. For more draw power, I also run 3 Pot of Duality. Now, if you don't want to run Pot of Duality, you can also substitute this card or one of the next play set of draw cards for Pot of Extravagance, because we don't really use the extra deck for much else in this deck. So having draw power where you want it, as long as it's not, Pot of basically any other one that would banish cards from the main deck. So Desires is definitely a bad one at that, but Duality is good. It just gives you the ideal search for, let's say, a specific card you may want to add for your hand later on. Restricting the special summon, the only really special summon we have in this deck is when we have the Legendary Exodia Incarnate. So biggest restriction there, I'd say, with this card, but still great for just searching out specific cards we may need. For more draw power and setup on the field, I run 3 Shard of Greed. Once again, just after 2 turns, being able to send this card with the greed counters on the field to the graveyard to draw 2 cards. It can give you the ideal cards you may need in your hand for some more of your other plays, or in turn, just the Exodia pieces you want. And lastly, for the play sets of draw spell cards, I run 3 Ledger of Ledgerman. With this one, you banish 3 cards from the top of your deck, face down, during your 3rd standby phase after this card's activation, and all 3 cards to your hand. You can only activate 1 Ledger of Ledgerman per turn, but being able to use this card after another and another means that you could just basically go each turn and ideally adding 3 cards to your hand that you banish. So with this card, activating it first turn, I would say is great priority, so it's a big one I do search with Pot of Duality, and then just being able to use this card and let's say tribute one of the Forbidden One pieces to summon out the Legendary Exodia Incarnate is another helpful one for that for sure. But 3 of it, just good for the draw power. If you didn't want to run any of Ledger of Ledgerman or Shard of Greed or Pot of Duality, Pot of Extravagance, I would say, is your next best card to go into for the draw setup. For some of the other cards, going off of the defensive plays, just like with Swift Scarecrow, I run 1 Terraforming and the 1 Mystic Mind, being able to search out this card for more stall against our opponent as long as they have more monsters than us. Normally, you don't summon any monsters at all, aside from Exodia Necros, Exodius, or the Legendary Incarnate. So it's just going to be usually 1 monster on the field anyway. So if your opponent has more monsters, you can at least play a little more stall using the Mystic Mind tactic against them. For some of the other 1-ofs in the deck, for draw power, 1 Day of Peace, just good for stalling out a turn of damage, and also drawing another card to your hand. Gold Sarcophagus to banish a specific Exodia piece, or even Exodia Necros or your contract with Exodia to your hand to use later on. Also, 1 card of Demise. Normally, in an Exodia deck, I wouldn't like this card for the fact that it discards your hand afterwards to the graveyard. But with having a lot of different cards you can set up on the field, like Mystic Mind and also Shard of Greed, and for the fact that cards like Exodius and also Exodia Necros benefit from having these cards in the graveyard, and also Exodia the Legendary Incarnate, it's what I decided to keep in the deck just as an option for, better graveyard plays for all of these cards. If you're not going to get all the Exodia pieces in your hand that much more quickly, I'd say it's much better just to go for another play with this card. And that's it for the spells. We'll now move on to the traps. Once again, working with the graveyard, I run 3 Obliterate. You can target 1 monster on the field, send 1 Forbidden monster or Exodia card from your hand or deck to the graveyard. And if you do, return that target to the hand. If this card is sent from the spell and trap card zone to the graveyard, you can target 1 Forbidden 1 monster or Exodia card in your graveyard and add it to your hand. So once again, another great way to recycle the Exodia cards back into your hand, but also benefiting from playing defensively against, let's say, some of your opponent's monsters they may summon on the field by basically being able to send Exodia cards from your hand or deck to the graveyard. So they don't even necessarily have to be the pieces of Exodia, since we have plenty of other forms for the Forbidden one in this deck as well. So 3 of this card also just gives us more recycle power if our opponent destroys it to go back to our hand and reuse those Exodia pieces, or once again, use them for what they were intended for, and that is to win the duel when you have all 5 pieces in your hand. For more draw power, I also run 3 Reckless Greed. Aside from the fact that you skip your next 2 draw phases, if you open up more and more multiple draw cards like Ledger of Ledgerman, and this card you can just draw multiple times. I normally like to activate Reckless Greed when I have 2 or more in my hand, because then I can just chain one to another and then just have to go off the 2 skipped draw phases while having at least all those different cards added to my hand. Once again, just thinning out the deck some more, I run 3 Jar of Greed. It just draws 1 card. That simple, but still great just to basically skim through the deck that much more. And the same with the final cards mechanics for the main deck being 3 Legacy Yatagarasu, just being able to draw 1 card. With Draw of Greed, if you set all these cards up on the field, activate them. If your opponent chains to destroy them, you can simply just activate them and draw more and more cards, thinning out the deck and giving you more better cards to use against your opponent. Ideally, one of the Exodia cards, or even just some of your stall cards you may need to stop against your opponent. And that is it for the main deck. When I move on to the extra deck, I run 2 Link Spider. I really don't go into the extra deck at all, or like going into it, but with my Forbidden One pieces, if I open them up and I just want to set them up in the graveyard that much more faster for the Legendary Incarnate, this is a great way to go about it. Just giving me the option for Link Spider to special summon 1 out on the field, then tribute it for that card, can set up more and more in the graveyard for me to use. For some of the other generics, I run 1 Link Karibo, 1 Landfornicus, 1 Proxy Dragon, 1 Wee Witch's Apprentice, 1 Triple Burst Dragon, 1 Decode Talker, 1 Nightmare Cerberus, 1 Barricade Board Blocker, especially do like this card if I have to make it, just to recycle the Mystic Mine, 1 Security Dragon, 1 Salamangreat Almirage, 1 Underclock Taker, 1 Nightmare Phoenix, and the 1 Nightmare Unicorn. Like I said, I rarely go in to the extra deck at all, but nice to always have all these available options. And once again, just good card fodder to banish if you were to run Pot of Extravagance for any of the playset spots that I spoke of earlier as well. And as for the go-to playstyle in the deck, there's really not much to it aside from just getting lucky with your draw. You activate all of these cards, and once again, your win condition is to open up the 5 pieces of Exodia, but if you don't have that route, you have plenty of other different forms of Exodia to summon out onto the field to make use of as more of a defensive play until you get the cards you need for the winning condition. But even so, with enough pieces set up in the graveyard, you can hit some pretty big numbers with the Legendary Exodia Incarnate, or go for the recycle with Exodius, or even just the indestructible Exodia Necros if you could set it up on the field. Going from easiness to summon, I'd say definitely the Legendary Incarnate, and then from Exodius to Exodia Necros. But trying to summon out each one of these, I can say, can just be as impressive as summoning out the actual Exodia altogether. But that is it for the deck profile. I hope you all enjoyed the video. I definitely enjoyed working on Exodia. Maybe one day we'll see more support for this deck, but until then, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and Kira Twig out.